cry is out that Americans are less safe today than they have been in years, and at the same time a cry that America needs to be tired of being spied upon by its own government. This as Edward Snowden likely sits back and chuckles from his Russian hideaway. Let's break out the hard line. Welcome in the former Lieutenant Governor for the state of New York, Senior Fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, Betsy McCaughey, and licensed attorney in the states of New York and New Jersey, adjunct professor in several areas of the law, and a co-founder of Lawyer Up, an educational firm for law students, Elura Nanos. Ladies, I thank you both for joining us today. Let's go ahead and lawyer everybody up here, if we will, and teach them a few things about the law. Elura, let's start with you. Rand Paul says absolutely not. We are not going to allow Freedom Act to get involved here. The Patriot Act is wrong. Boy, we have a mess going on here. But from a legal standpoint, Elura, does it now make sense that the NSA needs to get involved and they need to say, look, we have to have some protections here. We still have to be able to do our intelligence?
I mean, certainly the NSA can get involved to say that, although I'm not sure that the NSA itself needs to get involved in the debate, because it seems that there are people on all sides of the political spectrum that are already weighing in so heavily on this. The real problem with this is that that people are making their determinations of their opinion on the Patriot Act, or now the Freedom Act, which is the Compromise Act that's in play, based on just, sort of the general public climate. This is the problem we see, that the Patriot Act was introduced with these provisions that allow sweeping collection of data. It was done right after 9/11, and it was done largely in response to an overall feeling that we should just do whatever we can to combat terrorism.
Betsy, let me interrupt if I can, Elura, because I want to make sure we get everything in here. I want to get Betsy in on this. Betsy, that's a very good point, that it's the political climate that's driving this more actually than the legalese or the need to protect Americans. Would you agree?
Yes, and I'm glad you raised that point, because we cannot afford to let our constitutional republic, the oldest surviving constitutional government in the world, we cannot allow our constitutional republic to become a banana republic, ruled at the whim of a few top leaders and the information they are able to glean illegally. And that's what's happening. We see our phone records being recorded. We see our bank deposits and, more importantly, withdrawals being scrutinized. Now we see, as we'll talk in a moment, that our trips on the subway and bus in the morning are being regulated by the government. We can't see whatever ads we want. This is Big Brother. This is Orwellian. We cannot afford to let this happen. If it does, the terrorists win, because they are transforming our government and taking away our freedoms.
Well, let's get to this. Let's get to the protection of the freedoms here for a minute. And I want to get a comment from both of you on this, because this is very important. Betsy, you first. The people who are involved in spying, they say that, look, we understand that there are people who say that we can't actually show you what anything did to prevent a terrorist attack. We've all talked about that. But they will say, if we find one inkling, just something that stops one innocent American from being killed, and then that makes it all worthwhile. That's what we're in the job for, and we can't just snap our fingers and find a terrorist like that.
Well, the framers of the Bill of Rights, and particularly the Fourth Amendment, which protect us from unreasonable government intrusion into our private affairs, and the First Amendment, the most important of all, they knew that those in power would argue that they're going to do this for benign reasons.
All right, Elura, let me get it to you then. Same question, and it comes down to people saying that anything, we have to do something. We can't just turn the phone records over to the phone company, because that's not going to help us any.
Sure, I certainly agree that we have to do something, but I don't think that the justification that anything that works in whatever way, no matter how minute, justifies Fourth Amendment, just throwing the Fourth Amendment out in the trash. That's just not the way this country works, and it's not the way law enforcement works. There will always be that natural tension between individual liberty and national security, and that tension is a good thing, because both sides need to be kept in check.
Okay, let me stop you there when you say the tension is a good thing. Right there, because that's the point. After 9/11, we did give up some of our freedoms to try and make us safer. We all understand that. And I understand the Fourth Amendment, so will everybody else. We must protect that. But, Elura, don't we have to find a way to make the two of them fit together in what is a very different world of terror?
I think we absolutely have to find a way to make them fit together. And the answer cannot be things like the Patriot Act, where we just allow the government to have unlimited power to do whatever it wants just because we want to stop terrorism. And the flip side of that is that we cannot fight for individual liberty with no regard for how it is going to impact national security. There has to be a solution that impacts and fits both of those things. Otherwise, it won't work on either front.
20 seconds to you, Betsy, and then we'll take a break, come back and do more.
Well, the tension is very important, but the pendulum has swung too far. When we see ads being banned because they might incite violence against Americans, when we see citizens being muzzled, when we see this level of intrusion, the pendulum has swung too far.
All right, ladies, I'm going to ask you both to stand by because, Betsy, you indicated a little bit towards where we're going next, and that is your op-ed in the New York Times that talks about don't censor my commute, which I think is an important topic to talk about with regard to this, the Fourth Amendment, and everything else. Stand by. We're right back at you. This is the fastest 60 minutes of news. The Hardline continues. All right, let's get right back to it, if you will. Let's welcome back in the former Lieutenant Governor for the state of New York and also currently a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, Betsy McCaughey. And also let's welcome back the co-founder of Lawyer Up, an educational firm for law students, Elura Nanos. All right, Betsy, I'm going to start with you here because you had an interesting op-ed in the New York Times entitled Don't Censor My Commute. And this is talking about the subway platforms, the buses, not having certain things on those placards which many people believe incites violence. And we talk specifically about Muslim cartoons, Muslim ads, things that are pointed to that right now. Let me start out by saying there are people that will say this is a good idea. Don't get out there and force it. Don't get out there and create a problem. You, however, think that the bigger problem is censorship.
The bigger problem is the power of government to control the flow of information, what we see, what we hear, what we can read. And in this example, already Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York transit authorities have adopted a rule that gives them total discretion to decide what transit riders, subway riders, and bus riders will see in the morning. And the most breathtakingly dangerous rule is the New York rule, which says government can advertise, but critics of government cannot advertise. Imagine, that's right out of George Orwell. That means that New York, for example, could advertise that it's a great place to do business, but someone saying that New York's taxes are too high would be banned from putting up an ad.
Well, let me stop you right there because I think that's correct, but let's kind of cut the difference here, if you will. I think what everybody is looking at is the incitement of violence, I believe. Don't you think that there is some sort of responsibility there to make sure that you don't incite violence? Wouldn't you agree to that?
The fact is, Ed, that once you give government the power to determine what will incite violence and what won't, well, you've surrendered your First Amendment liberties. We have always erred on the side of guaranteeing freedom of expression and then providing for security where it's needed.
It's a very good point. Elura, let me get that to you. It comes down to that responsibility versus, and Betsy's point is very well taken, because once you start taking a little bit of a nibble out of this pie here, then you start taking a little more, and I think that's the fear.
It is, and I think she's absolutely right that this is something to be aware of and to be fearful of, overly intrusive government censorship. The First Amendment already does not protect speech that would incite violence, though. So truly, if whatever the speech is truly would have the effect to incite violence, the First Amendment wouldn't even cover that anyway. So really, the state of New York would already be allowed to censor that. So I think that we already have built-in
and rigorous test, however, and it was not met.
And I think that the point is, I think that's really, the point is that we need to have narrow and rigorous tests, and without that, with a sweeping ability for the government to simply ban whatever it wants anytime they stamp it as something that could incite violence, that really is problematic. It has to be on a case-by-case basis, and the government has to have articulable evidence for why they believe any censored speech would not be protected by the First Amendment.
2 minutes left. Let's turn to Hillary Clinton and cash donations. 20 foreign governments relying on weapons export approvals from Hillary Clinton's State Department. Elura, this is something that people are saying that these are the ones. Everybody keeps looking for the smoking gun here, and they're saying that Mrs. Clinton must explain these. She has to tell the people about these. Keeping quiet just won't get it done.
Yeah. And I think you're really right about that. I think this is really problematic for Hillary Clinton. I think that her supporters or people who are undecided are willing to forgive sort of nonsensical scandals like the email scandal. I don't think we care that much about that. But something like this, we're sort of used to our politicians kowtowing to big business, but we're not really so thrilled to know that their money, that they're being funded by foreign governments. I think that's much more frightening. I think it absolutely requires an explanation, and hopefully Hillary will have an explanation that will, at a minimum satisfy her supporters. But I don't think this can go unchecked. I think this is very problematic for her campaign.
Betsy, I got about 45 seconds left. Do you think she'll come up with any sort of an explanation that will make people go, oh, yeah, that's a good reason for that?
No, because in January 13th, 2009, at her confirmation hearing before the Foreign Relations Committee, she stonewalled them. They asked her not to take money from foreign governments or to reveal the amounts and the dates of that, and she refused. So she gave them plenty of red flags that she was going to do exactly what she's done, which is turn her position into an ATM machine for her family foundation.
And let me just make the point to everybody. While Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, her department approved $165 billion worth of commercial arms sales to Clinton Foundation donors. That's in 3 full fiscal years. It is double the value of arms sales to those countries during the same period of President George W. Bush's second term. So as we continue to see this argument go back and forth, I'm sure these comparisons are going to be made. But Mrs. Clinton, I think, has to say something about this. Silence is not golden in this case. Betsy McCaughey, Elura Nanos, it is always a pleasure to have you both on the show. Thank you so much. We'll do it again and come back soon.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
All right, my pleasure. But the question, of course, is when will Mrs. Clinton say something? What do you think about this? And what do you think about the fact that Hillary Clinton hasn't said anything about this yet? Send us the comments. Facebook, Twitter. We'll respond back, and the fastest 60 minutes in news continues.